When I first moved into the quiet suburban neighborhood, I thought I'd finally found peace. The houses were neat, lawns trimmed, and everything seemed perfect. Until I met Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of the HOA. Karen was relentless. She nitpicked every detail about my property, the color of my shutters, the placement of my trash bin, even the wind chimes on my porch. Soon, it escalated. She filed petty complaints with the HOA board, called the police on me for noise when I wasn't even home, and spread rumors that I was a troubled tenant. Her mission seemed clear: sabotage my life until I moved out. But what Karen didn't know was that I wasn't just living there, I was also the property owner. I had kept things low-key, letting a management company handle the lease paperwork. One day, after yet another bogus complaint, Karen decided to confront me publicly, HOA rulebook in hand. That's when I calmly pulled out my own folder, ownership documents, proving I was her landlord. The color drained from her face. The woman who tried to control my every move realized her entire campaign had been against the very person who held authority over her lease renewal. Suddenly, the constant complaints stopped. Karen, once loud and combative, went silent. And while I never sought revenge, the irony was delicious. The HOA warrior had sabotaged herself.
The phrase, "the tyranny of petty power," describes a situation where people use small amounts of authority to exert control far beyond what is reasonable, often leaving others feeling suffocated, harassed, or unfairly targeted. In the context of homeowners associations, or HOAs, this dynamic can play out in striking ways. An HOA is meant to preserve the value of a neighborhood by enforcing agreed-upon standards, maintaining shared spaces, and providing a sense of order. However, the same system that is supposed to protect residents can sometimes empower individuals to misuse authority in harmful ways. When someone, often dubbed a Karen in modern slang, takes it upon themselves to weaponize HOA rules, the neighborhood can turn from a place of comfort into a battleground. The issue is not that rules exist, because rules in themselves can create fairness. The problem arises when certain individuals elevate themselves into enforcers of these rules, interpreting them through the lens of their personal preferences and grudges. This creates an uneven application of authority, where some residents are constantly monitored and criticized, while others may be left alone simply because they are friendly with the rule enforcer. What begins as a system of community oversight can quickly turn into selective enforcement, favoritism, and even harassment. For the person on the receiving end, this doesn't feel like community building. It feels like targeted bullying with the backing of an official rulebook. Petty power thrives on technicalities. Instead of focusing on big-picture concerns like maintaining the safety and aesthetics of the neighborhood, individuals with this mindset often zero in on the smallest of details. A trash can placed a foot out of line, a lawn mowed 2 days later than usual, a car parked slightly off the curb. Each infraction is treated as a moral failing rather than a minor oversight, giving the self-appointed enforcer a sense of superiority and control. This behavior can escalate as the person becomes more obsessed with catching mistakes, almost as if finding fault in others validates their own position of influence. The more they catch their neighbors, the more powerful they feel, and soon they are no longer just following rules, but policing lives. The impact of this kind of behavior goes beyond annoyance. On a psychological level, being constantly scrutinized creates stress and anxiety. It can lead to feelings of being unwelcome in one's own home, which is especially troubling since a home is supposed to be the safest place a person can retreat to. Financial consequences can also arise if fines are issued repeatedly, sometimes over trivial matters. The dynamic can even cause divisions within the neighborhood, as some residents rally behind the enforcer while others quietly sympathize with the target but remain silent to avoid becoming the next victim. In this way, the tyranny of petty power doesn't just affect one individual, it corrodes the sense of unity and trust within an entire community. From an educational perspective, this issue highlights the importance of checks and balances in any system of governance, even at the neighborhood level. Authority without accountability almost always risks abuse, no matter how small the scope. In HOAs, there must be fair processes in place to ensure that rules are applied consistently and that no single person can hijack the system to settle personal vendettas. Homeowners and renters alike should understand their rights and know the proper procedures for addressing complaints. Transparency, documentation, and open communication are key tools in countering the misuse of power. Ultimately, the lesson to take away is that authority, no matter how minor, comes with responsibility. When used constructively, HOA rules can help maintain property values, keep shared areas in good condition, and provide a pleasant environment for everyone. But when individuals twist these rules to impose their will, the result is not community harmony, but neighborhood hostility. Understanding the difference between responsible rule enforcement and petty power trips is essential if neighborhoods are to remain welcoming places. When people recognize this distinction, they can better guard against those who exploit minor authority and instead foster a culture of fairness and respect.
Escalation to sabotage often happens when conflict in a community stops being about rules and starts being about personal control. In neighborhoods governed by HOAs, what begins as small disputes over minor infractions can quickly spiral into a campaign designed to make someone's daily life unbearable. This is not just about enforcing standards, but about deliberately using tools of authority, such as complaints, fines, or even calls to law enforcement, to pressure a neighbor into compliance or drive them away altogether. Understanding how this escalation works is important because it reveals how power can be misused and how individuals can prepare themselves to respond effectively. One of the first signs of escalation is the frequency and intensity of complaints. A reasonable community member might point out an issue once or twice and then move on. But when someone is intent on sabotage, they often adopt a pattern of relentless monitoring. Every small action becomes an excuse to file a report. It might start with warnings about lawn care or parking, but quickly extends to accusations about noise, suspicious activity, or violations that do not even exist. This constant flood of complaints creates an atmosphere of hostility, and the person on the receiving end begins to feel trapped in a cycle where no action is ever good enough. Another common tactic is involving outside authorities. Instead of relying solely on HOA procedures, the aggressor might call the police or city code enforcement to report so-called violations. In many cases, these reports are exaggerated or completely false, but they force the target into repeated encounters with officials. Even when nothing comes of these calls, the process itself is disruptive and intimidating. Being questioned by police or warned by city officials, even unjustly, can be stressful and damaging to a person's reputation. This misuse of official channels transforms what should be a neighborly disagreement into something that feels like harassment by institutions. Social sabotage is another layer of escalation. Beyond formal complaints, individuals may spread rumors or gossip within the neighborhood. They might claim someone as a disruptive tenant, a careless homeowner, or even unsafe to live near. These rumors, whether true or not, can damage a person's relationships with other neighbors and create an isolating environment. Humans naturally want to belong to their communities, and when that sense of belonging is stripped away through deliberate social exclusion, the target may feel even more pressure to leave. Financial pressure is often used as well. HOAs have the power to levy fines for violations, and while these are intended to encourage compliance, they can become tools of punishment when applied unfairly or excessively. A person facing constant fines over trivial issues might find themselves paying hundreds or even thousands of dollars simply to avoid escalation to legal action. In extreme cases, persistent fines and legal fees can even threaten home ownership. This shows how something as small as a disagreement over yard maintenance can snowball into severe financial consequences if handled maliciously. What makes escalation so damaging is that it often leaves the victim feeling powerless. When every channel of complaint is turned against them, when their reputation in the community is undermined, and when their finances are threatened, the logical response might seem to be surrender or moving away. However, education about rights and processes can provide an alternative. Knowing that false police reports themselves can be considered harassment, understanding the limits of HOA authority, and keeping detailed records of every incident can shift the balance. Documentation is especially powerful because it creates an objective trail of evidence that can later be used to challenge unfair treatment. At its core, escalation to sabotage reflects a breakdown in community trust. Instead of neighbors solving problems through communication and compromise, one person weaponizes systems meant to serve everyone. The broader lesson here is that systems of government, whether small like an HOA or large like local government, must be protected from being turned into instruments of personal vendettas. Communities must prioritize fairness, checks on authority, and avenues for addressing grievances without allowing individuals to dominate the process. When those values are upheld, conflict can be managed without allowing it to deteriorate into sabotage.
The hidden truth in conflicts with difficult neighbors or domineering HOA members is that calmness and careful documentation can completely shift the power dynamic. When someone is facing constant harassment, false complaints, or unfair treatment, the natural response is often to react with anger or frustration. However, escalation through emotional responses usually plays into the aggressor's strategy, giving them more fuel to portray the target as disruptive or non-compliant. The more effective approach is to remain calm, collect evidence, and quietly build a foundation that can later dismantle false claims. This approach is not about passivity, it is about choosing strategy over reaction. One of the reasons this works so well is that systems like HOAs, police departments, or code enforcement offices rely on paperwork and evidence, not emotions. Complaints that are vague or repetitive eventually lose credibility, especially when contrasted with clear, detailed records from the other side. For example, if someone files a noise complaint, but the targeted resident has a log showing they were not home at the time, along with receipts or witness statements, the credibility of the complainant diminishes. Over time, a pattern emerges showing that one party is misusing the system, while the other is operating transparently. Documentation takes many forms. Written logs of incidents, photographs, emails, and even video recordings can all contribute to establishing the truth. The key is consistency. Recording every incident, no matter how small, creates a timeline that is difficult to dispute later. Even if an individual never intends to go to court, this record can be presented to the HOA board, police supervisors, or mediators as proof of harassment. What might feel like insignificant details in the moment often become powerful evidence when viewed as part of a larger pattern of behavior. Another element of this hidden truth is that knowledge of rights can be just as important as documentation. Many people assume that HOAs have unlimited power, but in reality, their authority is bound by governing documents and local laws. Tenants and homeowners alike have the right to challenge fines, appeal board decisions, and request formal hearings. In many regions, harassment through repeated false police reports can itself be treated as a crime or civil offense. Knowing these boundaries gives residents confidence because they no longer see themselves as powerless targets, but as individuals protected by rules as much as anyone else. Education about these rights transforms the situation from one of victimization to one of strategic defense. Calmness also undermines the tactics of the aggressor.
Someone engaging in harassment often thrives on provoking emotional reactions. They want their target to yell, act defensively, or make mistakes that can later be exaggerated into proof of being disruptive. By refusing to give that satisfaction and instead responding politely or not at all, the target denies the aggressor the reactions they crave. Over time, the contrast between calm, factual responses and hostile, exaggerated accusations becomes impossible to ignore. Neutrality becomes a strength, not a weakness. What ultimately flips the power dynamic is that truth, once backed by evidence and presented calmly, exposes the aggressor's misuse of authority. It may not happen immediately, but persistence pays off. Boards, police, and neighbors eventually begin to see through patterns of false complaints, and credibility shifts toward the person who has remained consistent and factual. When that moment arrives, the aggressor often loses the very power they worked so hard to build. Their reputation erodes, their influence diminishes, and they may even face consequences for their misuse of authority. The larger lesson is that in conflicts where authority is being abused, strategy outweighs confrontation. Remaining calm, collecting documentation, and knowing one's rights allow individuals to reclaim control without sinking to the level of those trying to sabotage them. This approach not only protects against immediate harassment, but also ensures long-term stability and fairness. The hidden truth is that while petty power relies on intimidation and noise, real power lies in patience, evidence, and composure. It may not feel satisfying in the short term, but it ultimately transforms the situation in favor of those who stand firm with facts.
Poetic justice is a concept where the outcome of a situation ironically reflects the actions of those involved, often delivering a fitting reversal of fortune. In the case of neighborhood disputes and HOA conflicts, poetic justice emerges when a person who has spent significant energy trying to control or sabotage others ends up undermining themselves. It is a reminder that excessive misuse of power often carries hidden consequences, and that attempts to dominate others can lead to personal embarrassment, loss of credibility, or even legal and financial repercussions. This lesson is not just entertaining to observe, but educational in understanding how human behavior and systems of authority eventually balance themselves out. When someone engages in harassment through false reports, excessive complaints, or social intimidation, they believe they are operating from a position of strength. They assume that rules, systems, and community support will remain on their side indefinitely. However, these tactics tend to overextend the aggressor. Each false complaint requires energy, time, and often exaggeration. As the number of complaints grows, so does the likelihood that inconsistencies will appear. Neighbors, board members, or authorities begin to notice the pattern, and what once seemed like diligence begins to look like obsession. The aggressor may not realize it at first, but their credibility starts to erode with each new attempt to control. The irony of poetic justice is that it often unfolds quietly but powerfully. The target of harassment, if patient and strategic, eventually reaches a moment where the truth cannot be hidden. In the scenario where an HOA enforcer discovers that the person they have been antagonizing is actually their landlord, the reversal is immediate and undeniable. All the energy invested in sabotage collapses in a single moment of realization. What had been a campaign of intimidation turns into a situation where the aggressor holds no leverage, and their previous actions are exposed as both unnecessary and self-destructive. The silence that follows is not just a retreat, but an acknowledgement of misplaced confidence. Poetic justice is effective because it resonates on both a social and psychological level. Socially, it restores balance in a community by showing that misuse of rules will not go unchecked forever. Psychologically, it delivers an important lesson to the aggressor, that authority is conditional and should be exercised responsibly. For the target, it offers a sense of vindication without needing to resort to revenge or retaliation. It shows that patience, documentation, and composure are not just defensive tactics, but active strategies that allow truth to reveal itself at the right time.
There is also an educational dimension in recognizing that poetic justice is not about waiting for karma in a mystical sense, but about understanding the natural consequences of behavior. Systems of governance, whether small like an HOA or large like city government, rely on credibility and fairness to function. When someone abuses these systems, their credibility becomes fragile. Once that credibility collapses, they lose the very influence they depended on. The person who tried to sabotage others ends up sabotaging themselves because they fail to see the limits of their own authority. In practical terms, this means that people dealing with harassment or unfair treatment should not only defend themselves, but also trust in the natural outcomes of excessive control. By maintaining integrity and allowing the aggressor's behavior to overextend, the conditions for poetic justice are set. This does not mean passivity, it means strategic patience. The aggressor creates their own downfall by demonstrating over and over again that their intentions are not rooted in fairness, but in domination. Ultimately, poetic justice is not just satisfying, it is instructive. It teaches communities that authority must be balanced with accountability, and it reminds individuals that control achieved through intimidation rarely lasts. Those who weaponize rules for personal gain eventually face the embarrassment of being revealed, often at the very moment they feel most powerful. For those who are targeted, this understanding provides reassurance that while harassment may be difficult in the short term, truth and fairness have a way of surfacing in ways that no aggressor can control.